Hi, everyone. I'm Maggie McGrath, senior editor at Forbes. The Supreme Court today heard oral arguments in a case about lower courts' authority to stop President Trump's executive order regarding birthright citizenship. This is a high-profile case, and joining us to break it all down is constitutional lawyer Jeff Lewis. Jeff, thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So, as you and I were just saying before we started recording, this case is a little specific. It's not so much that the Supreme Court is actively considering the issue of birthright citizenship, but rather the authority of lower courts to interfere in the application of President Trump's executive order regarding birthright citizenship. Is that correct?
That's exactly right. The Trump administration didn't ask the Supreme Court to weigh in on the legitimacy of birthright citizenship or the merits of this constitutional argument. Instead, the narrow procedural question is whether lower courts, federal judges, have the power to issue these nationwide injunctions in this and other contexts.
So, you heard the first 45 minutes of oral arguments today. Take us through what you heard and broadly what happened in court today.
There were a lot of questions asked about where should the line be if the court were to allow nationwide injunctions to be issued by lower courts. What is a test that would, or a limiting principle where a judge could decide what is an appropriate case for issuing such an injunction? Is it that it's an egregious violation of the Constitution? Is it a facial challenge? Those are the types of questions that were asked of both sets of lawyers.
Is this case ultimately a backdoor into ending injunctions from lower courts on all issues? We've seen this happen with specifically reproductive rights cases in some cases. You hear the word injunction quite a bit these days. Does the Trump administration just want to end that ability?
Well, let's be fair to President Trump. There's been widespread criticism of nationwide injunctions from lots of administrations when it was used to restrict access to the abortion pill. One judge in Texas who issued this decision that had nationwide impact. There's been lots of opposition or concern about the scope of nationwide injunctions. So it's not really a partisan issue. And yeah, what is that issue here is not limited to just the citizenship debate, but the power of federal judges to issue relief for people who are not in front of that judge, or will everybody who's aggrieved by the citizenship question have to file their own separate lawsuits?
So, what happens after today? Do we know when the Supreme Court will decide, and do we know how they might decide?
There's no time limit for them to issue relief, but everybody thinks they'll issue relief within the next 30 days because of how fast and the unprecedented nature in which this argument reached the Supreme Court. Recall it was on the shadow docket and reached the this oral argument stage without a lot of the traditional briefing you see. And I was counting votes. It is my prediction that the court will not reach the actual merits of whether or not someone born in the United States is a citizen, and instead will keep their analysis limited to whether or not a federal judge has the power to issue an injunction nationwide. And then the big question will it be limited to the facts of this case or go broader in terms of all the executive orders? And I predict it'll be a 3-6 vote, perhaps a 4-5 vote, restricting the ability of federal judges to issue injunctions. You heard the three liberal justices, Sotomayor, Kagan, and Jackson, all asking very difficult questions of the Solicitor General, suggesting those three are supportive of national injunctions. And Justice Barrett also asked some difficult questions. I didn't see any other justices asking questions that suggested to me that they're ready to expand this power of national injunctions.
So, if the ruling were to come down in the way that you predict, what would then happen? Can you give us a sample use case?
Yeah, it would mean that only the parties to this specific case, or actually there's three cases in front of the Supreme Court that were consolidated, only they would benefit from the injunction. And therefore, anybody else who perhaps is pregnant and about to have a baby and they want to have some assurance about whether or not their baby's citizenship is assured, or state regulators who are concerned about the administrative headache of having to determine whether patients coming into hospitals are actual citizens and have the right to receive services, all of those people who are aggrieved by the executive order would each have to file a separate lawsuit, or an enterprising plaintiff's lawyer might be able to craft a class action. The Supreme Court did leave open the door today to possibility of filing a class action for all the people harmed by this executive order.
So effectively, litigation action would increase what sounds like almost more than tenfold.
The courts are going to be buried, absolutely buried in challenges. And in addition to the quantity of decisions, you're going to have conflicting decisions. Judges in California, where I am, might issue decisions that conflict with decisions issued in Kentucky or Texas. And so it's going to create a mess.
Is there anything within the Constitution that would prevent that mess or perhaps make this case go in a different direction? Or I guess you said 6-3. Could it go 6-3 in the other way because of something that is in the Constitution that would allow for nationwide injunctions?
Well, getting to Justice Thomas's questions today, there is no real express provision in either the Constitution or the Judiciary Acts passed by Congress that empowers judges to issue nationwide injunctions. There is a historical practice, and the question is whether or not the Supreme Court wants to craft, not as a matter of constitutional law or congressional authority, a judicial doctrine that there's certain extreme cases of constitutional violations that are clear on their face. Yeah, there is a hypothetical possibility that they could create such a doctrine, but I didn't see the votes today for that.
And you mentioned precedent. How much does this court care and consider precedent compared to other courts in your experience?
Well, that brings us, back to Roe v. Wade being overturned. Roe v. Wade was long held to be the law of the land, and that was discarded. There's been decades of lower courts and higher courts, all the way up to the Supreme Court, affirming the use of national or nationwide injunctions. And so this would be I'm not going to say unprecedented, but this would be a departure from those cases and precedent that allow national or broadly phrased injunctions to be given effect.
A lot of the media and social commentary I've seen around this case is focusing on the actual question of birthright citizenship and the legality under constitutional law. Were there any questions today from any of the justices that hit at the heart of that issue?
No, no, none of these justices wanted to tackle that question because they know it's a loser. It's a loser for the Trump administration, and none of the justices wanted to even touch it. And Maggie, I will buy you lunch if the opinion issued in this case deals with the citizenship question directly.
And you say that because there's constitutional protection for birthright citizenship, and it almost is, I don't put words in your mouth, but some of what I have been seeing in commentary, admittedly on the more progressive side, is saying there's no way we can reconsider this. It is the law of the land. Is that what you would say?
Most people, even the conservative folks and the liberal folks, agree that this view of the Constitution and its amendments has been around for so long that to disturb it at this juncture, at this late juncture, would be extraordinary as it was reversing Roe v. Wade in light of how long Roe v. Wade was around. And so it's that long-standing respect for the 14th Amendment that I think is going to compel these justices to leave it alone.
Is there any argument or case to be made that, the time in which the 14th Amendment was written is a different time than we are in now, and therefore the 14th Amendment should be revisited? Does that argument hold water?
Yeah, that's the precise argument advanced by the Trump administration. It's interesting because typically conservatives and Justice Thomas will look at the plain text of the Constitution and their amendments, and the plain text seems to suggest that anyone born here is a citizen, and that you have to go through the history and what was happening to the country at the time it was passed to contradict that plain text. And that's not typically an argument you see conservative justices advancing.
So you said that relief will likely come within 30 days. What, in layman's terms, does relief mean in this situation?
So right now, there's a nationwide injunction prohibiting enforcement of the executive order on this issue of citizenship. And my prediction is that on a 6-3 or maybe a 5-4 basis, an opinion will issue from the Supreme Court dissolving that injunction or limiting that injunction to just the parties involved in the three cases and not have nationwide effect. And the next practical effect after that is you're going to see many, many, many lawsuits filed on behalf of aggrieved people who are not parties to that case, or perhaps a joinder to that case, or perhaps someone will file a class action.
What will you be watching for in the next 30 days, or what questions will you be asking?
Well, I was looking today to see if there were any justices who seemed interested in establishing a bright line rule for lower courts to follow in terms of nationwide injunctions, not just for this case, but for all cases. And I didn't hear any questions suggesting that they have a lot of appetite or interest in that. So my prediction and what I'm going to be looking to see is probably a pretty narrow opinion limited to just this case, and it won't have application to other executive orders. But who knows?
Is there anything else our Forbes audience should know, or anything they should have in mind as they continue to read news coverage and hear discussion of what is broadly being described as the birthright citizenship case, but perhaps could more accurately be described as lower court authority case?
Yeah, that's right. Read beyond the headlines. Read the actual opinions when they come out, or read the articles, or watch the interviews that discuss that. Yeah, this is not a birthright citizenship case. It is a nationwide injunction case, and it's a law of procedure that appellate nerds like me love to study, but has really nothing to do with birthright citizenship.
Jeff Lewis, constitutional lawyer, thank you so much for joining us and breaking down the specifics of this case. We really, really appreciate your time and your insight.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Have me back on when the opinion comes down.
We absolutely will, because I suspect it will be hard to parse for those of us lay people who do not have JDs.